Hello, good evening, and welcome. Apologies for the delay. We have now, we hope, resolved all of our issues, but this is Spectrum Debate show number 5, whether you're watching on YouTube, Google Plus, or elsewhere. Tonight each of our guests has a topic for a debate, and they will introduce their topic, and then we will debate it, of course, with your help. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce each of our guests, but remember, we do want to hear your views, and we want you to send in questions or points to challenge each of our guests about our debates, or if there's something else that you want to put to them, do send it our way. You can do so using the hashtag #SpectrumDebate, singular, or if you're watching on Google+, you can use the Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to put your questions to our guests and to let all of our viewers know what it is that you're thinking. If you're watching on Google+, and the link for that should be somewhere down here on YouTube, you can also use the applause app, which will tell us how much you agree or disagree with what is being said at any particular moment in time. But without further ado, let me introduce our guests to you, and then we'll find out what their topics are. We begin with Councillor Mathew Hulbert. He's a Lib Dem councillor in Leicestershire, twice shortlisted for Lib Dem Councillor of the Year. I think it's fair to say he's on the left of his party. Mathew is also prominent in a variety of campaign groups such as Compass and Republic, and you can find him on Twitter at Hulbert Mathew. Good evening, Mathew. How are you?
Hi there, Gareth. Lovely to see you.
And you, what's your topic for this evening?
Well, my topic is the rise of the SNP, even despite them losing the referendum campaign. I think there's certain things other parties can learn from them.
Fantastic, thank you very much indeed. Our next guest is our now semi-regular Lily Jane Summers. She hails from the West Midlands. She's an avid blogger, a Labour Party activist, and a socially liberal socialist. My keyboard had some issues typing that. She is, however, always up for a debate on Twitter, where you can find her at Miss Lily Summers. Good evening, Lily.
Good evening, Gareth.
And can you like to tell our viewers what your topic is, please?
My topic will be on immigration in linking with the recent by-election in Rochester and Stroud, essentially where all the parties have tried to make themselves seem anti-immigration. So, essentially immigration.
Thank you very much. Our next guest is Martin Keegan. He is an active citizen, computer programmer and plainclothes comedian whose work takes him to some very exotic places. Recently I was discussing this whole thing with him, I think from an airport in Bosnia. Martin is an independent guest. He's a supporter of no party in particular. You can find him on Twitter at MK270. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening, Gareth. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure to see you. What would be your topic that you're going to be introducing and talking about tonight?
That would be the subject of how international treaties are having too much influence on our politics and on our law, particularly the recent TTIP, Transatlantic Investment Partnership Treaty, but the treaties in general.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And our final guest, who has temporarily evaded us, is Dylan Morris. You wouldn't believe how difficult this has been tonight so far, but Dylan has managed to find a way on, but it appears to have stopped. He'll be back with us in a few minutes' time, he's just telling me, once his phone has been plugged in and is ready to go again. Fortunately, he is not our first topic. Just to introduce myself, my name is Gareth, I'm your host, and for full disclosure, I'm a Conservative, but I will do my best to play devil's advocate and to challenge all of our guests tonight. The standard disclaimer, of course, is that whilst our guests may or may not support any party, please take everything they say tonight as their own personal opinion, because no one here is speaking in an official capacity for anyone or anything other than themselves. And if you would like to appear down here in future, you will be very welcome, whatever your view. Just get in touch, we'll reserve your place, we can practice beforehand. It is often really quite simple, and even when there are problems, we manage to get them sorted. We want as many of you as possible to come on and join us, so just let us know. We begin by going to our first guest, who will introduce their topic, and that tonight is Lily. Here you are, Lily. Tell us all about it, and let's get going.
Well, my first topic is all about immigration, and it all links in with the recent by-election that we saw in Rochester and Stroud, which Mark Conservative Party, obviously. And essentially what my argument is all about is I think that all the main political parties, aside from the Lib Dems in particular, is that they've tried to ratchet up the, in a way, anti-immigration feeling, the scaremongering over immigration, and that immigration seems to be a bad thing, or that immigrants seem to be a problem. So in particular for the by-election, I mean, it was a very, it seems mostly on the campaign, aside from the NHS, it seemed to be mostly about immigration. For example, the Conservative Party candidate there, well, seems to try to say that she was, the most, the candidate who was mostly in favour of immigration controls, focusing on immigration, and I think all focusing on immigration in a very negative way. For example, in UKIP, they were scaremongering over Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants through controls in terms of work permits. So my fear is, and essentially what my argument is all about, I think it's, in terms of immigration, there's been a negative scaremongering and fear that we've seen from all the main parties, from UKIP, from the Conservatives, and even from the Labour Party. So that's essentially what my argument and topic's all about, Gareth.
Thank you very much, Lee. Matthew, there was some faint praise for your party, for the Liberal Democrats, in what Lily's just said, in terms of them being one of the few parties who were not necessarily trying to pander to an anti-immigrant sentiment. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think that's right, and I think, we really would be in trouble if even the Liberal Democrats were playing this game of trying to get to the bottom of the barrel in terms of the discourse on immigration. I mean, I think on the issue itself, I think what we have here is a couple of things. I think we have a situation where people think, rightly or wrongly, that politics doesn't work for them anymore, and that the main parties have, over time, all three of them, people argue, let folks down. And so I think they're looking for an alternative. Now, you'd expect me to say, wouldn't you, that I don't think the alternative should be UKIP, but I think for a lot of people, partly because they have a charismatic leader who seems to talk in a normal way, like a bloke down the pub, partly because they have populist policies, people are seeing them as an attractive alternative to these three main parties, which folks feel don't work for them anymore, and they look at the leadership, even though Farage really is Mr. Establishment. I mean, this is a guy who used to work in the city and has been an MEP for 15 years, but people still see him, they kind of forget all of that, they put that to the back of their minds, and they see him as an anti-establishment figure, and I think partly because, although the economy is getting better, people don't feel it in their back pockets, and they don't feel it in their wage slips. The easiest thing to do is to blame it on something other, and the something other on this occasion is immigrants and immigration. Now, of course, I think that immigration is a net benefit. In fact, the facts show that immigration is a net benefit to our economy. And I think people, if they're honest with themselves, probably know that, but that's overridden by people feeling that politics doesn't work for them anymore and that the economy isn't working for them either. And so I think until all three main parties realise that and focus on it, but don't do it in a way which panders to the very worst of themselves, we'll remain in a situation where UKIP remain very popular.
Thank you. A few points here from our audience so far. First of all, Colin says that really I should unbutton my shirt. I'm not sure how that's relevant to immigration, Colin, but thank you for the comment. That's Colin 93F. I actually know Colin. But I just thought I'd pop that in. Cameron S, at Cameron_surname. Mass immigration is bad for the UK and is the front of people's minds, so parties would try to capitalise on it. Matt Valencourt at MV Libertas says, it was always a big topic. UKIP was indeed able to push the subject politically at the forefront. We had John Mousley, who was on last week, saying that it can't be scaremongering if it's true. Chris G at Chris G 0000, immigration is a plus for the UK, but polling is clear. Be a brave politician this close to a general election to tell audiences that they are wrong. And John Mousley, is a point that I'll come back to you on shortly, but not just yet, Matthew. Lib Dems are playing this game. It's just they only play it with non-Europeans, which is dodgy as hell. Martin, as someone who doesn't ascribe to any of these parties, how do you view the debate on immigration?
Well, I'm glad that there is a debate on immigration. I'm originally from Australia, as you may be able to tell by the way I speak, and in Australia there is a considerably more open debate on immigration. It concentrates on the push and pull factors, why people want to come to the country, why they might be leaving the countries they're living in, and we do not have a frank discussion of that in the UK. I support immigration into Australia. I'm much more sceptical about it in the UK in terms of who is currently coming and their ability to contribute to the economy. In Australia, there is the remnant of what used to be an explicitly racist system, which obtained for 70 or 80 years, which was called the White Australia policy, and it discriminated against people who were not white. It was a disgrace. It was supported for far too long, and the machinery of discrimination was retained and is now employed in favour of people regarded as economically beneficial migrants. And under that controlled regime, Australia has more people born outside the country than almost anywhere else in the world apart from Canada. In the UK, in about 2005, there was a proposal to introduce a points-based immigration system, which was dismissed as racist. It's perfectly possible to have a racist points-based immigration system. We can't deny that. We may be using the point system to privilege white people from Eastern Europe, or to privilege, people that are like us in some way, whatever. But I think we need to focus on the facts, look at who it is that's coming in, and have a wholly positive attitude towards people who think that they ought to leave the country that they live in and move here, or who live here and wants to move to a different country. I lived as an immigrant myself in Bosnia recently, and so the gentleman from the Lib Dems, whose name I forgot, is it Dylan?
Matthew,
I'm sorry about that. Was talking about, is immigration a net benefit to British society, British economy? And there certainly have been research and reports on this, conflicting, but generally saying that overall, immigration over the last 20 years or so, since about 95, has been beneficial, but not very much. £1 or £2 per week per person in the UK. But we run a massive fiscal deficit, and actually all British people tend to be drags on the public finances, and immigrants from Eastern Europe, who tend to be younger, are a net contributor. Overall, however, the benefits, although they are positive across the whole of the UK, are not very large, and they are not evenly distributed. And it is this distribution, both for free trade and for free migration, the distributive effect, rich versus poor, of the existing population, that we're not concentrating on enough. Some people might want to talk about cultural integration. I don't care too much. What I care about is the fact that the poorest people, the working class in this country, have been exposed to a global labour market, whereas protectionism in the professions means that middle class people don't face as much competition from other people who can come to the country. When people seem to think that that immigrants draw benefits into a much greater proportion, and that doesn't seem to be true, but it is widely believed. It is, however, widely believed that that immigrants do jobs in this country that no one else is prepared to do anymore, like voting labour, but mainly being fruit picking and all sorts of things. And there are various practices which the government ought to be stamping out. Violation of minimum wage laws, recruiting people in Eastern European countries, and using different criteria and standards for offering jobs to people that they recruit and then bring over, is something I do not know how much of an effect that has on the overall situation. But the paradoxical effect of bringing more people into the country is to drive up inflation. We're told that immigration will be very good for keeping inflation down, and for the pension system. But the evidence appears to be that bringing more people into the country has a small inflationary effect. It drives up wages because whereas there's more competition for jobs, there's also more people who want houses, more people who want transport, more people who want food, and it places people who still have jobs in the UK, native or immigrant, in a better position to negotiate with their employers for a pay rise, which is completely the opposite of the commonly understood downward pressure on overall wages. But that's for people who've got jobs. For people who can't get jobs, it does drive the average down somewhat, and those effects, as I understand it, are most strongly felt by people who don't have very good skills in the labour market, and so I'm very concerned about immigration creating inequality, and I believe that a points-based system that said only people coming in who are high skilled should be allowed in. But I appreciate that may have very, very bad effects. I've tried to avoid talking about people who are coming to the country because they were pushed out of their own country. There's been a disgraceful debate about that in the UK and many European countries for a long time, a failure to distinguish between legitimate refugees and legitimate asylum seekers, and a conflation between those and people who are economic migrants, and people pretending to be one of these categories when they're a different one. I have seen terribly authoritarian measures proposed for controlling this, and so whereas I believe strongly controlled migration, I do not believe in the means and mechanisms that are often proposed to do it, such as more border checks, biometric identity card systems, mass surveillance. And I've sat in and argued with the Minister of Justice in Iceland, Bjarne Bjørnson, when he said that if someone is rejected for an asylum application, we'll send them back to Zimbabwe or whatever. And if they ever apply again, even under a different identity but with the same biometrics, because they can't fake that, we'll reject their application. And that means that if something gets worse in a foreign country, people would not be able to come to this country just because they've been rejected once before. So, there is a complete lack of reasoning and thinking about how we ought to do the mechanisms for this. But for me, it's about the economics and not saying what is best for all of society, but looking at everyone in society, not just the average. Look at the distribution, look at the effects on rich and poor. I've talked for a long time now, and I'm sure I've said a lot of things that people are going to object to very seriously. Thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And your final point is a very important one. There is a big distinction between economic immigration and migration on one hand, and those who are refugees claiming asylum on the other. And that's something I might talk about in a couple of minutes. Our comments have gone wild on this topic. I'll come to you in a moment, Dylan.
Yeah,
I'll just try and get a flavour.
Refugees and asylum seekers, they're two different sorts of people. One wants to go home one day, one never wants to go home, and it's important to make that distinction. I'll stop now.
Okay, what we've got here is there are a variety of issues and a variety of things that people have talked about. Some have said things to do with that actually people don't have an issue with immigration, it's the way in which it was done that was the problem. So, for example, Chris G is telling us that Tony Blair talked right and acted left on immigration, and the public felt the wool was pulled over their eyes. Sam Baxter, it's so difficult to challenge the more sinister views on immigration. Look at what Reckless got away with. There was a very approving comment here from Miss Robin Alice, who's saying, who says, like voting Labour, approving chuckle. That was very much welcomed. Adam Hawkes is saying that immigration done right is not a problem. It carries many benefits. I think the public are too quick to judge. Alessia, at Upon a Cloud, today talking immigration, and I really want to make a tongue-in-cheek joke at this point. Why can't I ever be serious? Alicia, do it. We would welcome it. James at Gaylorsight has tweeted a couple of infographics here detailing what he says are the benefits and necessities. I've retweeted them on the actually I haven't retweeted that one on the Bates account. Dylan,
hello.
What do you have to say on this?
I'm quite conscious not to repeat anything that's already been said because I missed obviously the first few comments that have been made.
Welcome, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I feel very welcome. Yeah, I mean, in terms of Rochester in tying with immigration, Rochester tying with that, I think that we've got to look solely at EU immigration, surely, because that's the key thing that was debated. Because if we look at a UKIP win, we normally look at how UKIP target the EU, and normally they target EU immigration in particular. I mean, we've all seen, I'm sure, the studies that have been published recently saying that EU immigrants have brought a net benefit to the country over the last few years. I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, the reasons to object to immigration are numerous, but I think they're all pretty easily refutable. The main one I've seen is that it pushes down wages, which we heard from the last speaker, but I don't think that's true either. I mean, looking at...
I said the opposite of that.
Did you? You said the opposite. You said the opposite of it pushes down wages. You said that immigration increases wages.
Wages and inflation.
Wages and inflation.
For people who have jobs, well, I mean, inflation going up is... wages going up is inflation, for a start. But
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That wasn't meant to sound patronising. Yeah.
No, okay, that's fine, sorry.
It's a tautology. It's a tautology.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I must have got the last end of your comment, which was probably negated by the first part of your comment. So I think that looking at Rochester, UKIP are very good at looking at immigration and making it a topic to win elections, not to actually face properly, which is what we really need to do. I think my party, the Conservatives, I don't want to sound too party line today. I promised myself I wouldn't do it because I'm not usually party line. But the Conservatives, I think, are doing the right thing on immigration. They're looking at capping external immigration from the European Union, and now they're looking at the inside of the European Union and making sure we get the right people coming into this country, which is what we need. I mean, a lot of people come into this country, as was mentioned before, refugees, asylum seekers. Those are the people we need to look at and say, I don't want to say we should relax immigration laws in terms of refugees and asylum seekers, but I think we need to be a little less stringent on them, because a lot of horror stories have come out of countries that are completely war-torn and destroyed, and we need to look at them in a much more compassionate manner, I think. And I mean, my topic later is about being denied a work visa for Julien Blanc, the pickup artist, and I don't see why we can say that we shouldn't let in asylum seekers and refugees and let him in as well. It makes no sense to me. But I think in terms of immigration on a wider scale, there needs to be a real conversation about it. It's quite tough to do it in a show, of course, even in 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever we've got on this single topic. But EU migration is a good thing. I'm incredibly pro-EU, and I hear the comment that Tony Blair talked right but acted left. I think Tony Blair talked right and acted right on immigration. I think he went too far in restricting immigration. I agree with the open doors policy that Labour had for the 13 years they were in government. I think it was a really good thing. I'm hoping that Lily agrees with me, so I'm not completely demonised here on the panel for saying that. But I do think that the open door policy that Labour had was really good. I've seen myself personally a lot of net benefits. I've seen economically in the wider society a lot of net benefits. And I really think that immigration is something we should embrace and not reject. That's what I think is worrying about UKIP. I think that UKIP are turning the debate on immigration very sour. They're pulling some very dirty tricks. They did in Rochester. A lot of my friends went to campaign there, and they saw a lot of things going on they didn't really want to see going on in terms of immigration debate. I think that we need to have a real debate about it and not one that's based on scaremongering, which is what I think UKIP have been doing for the last 3 years, even though in the last one they've been actually in the news about it.
Thank you very much. Again, many comments. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to get to read them all out, but to give you a flavour of what some people have said, Ryan here is telling us that he agrees with what Lily said at the start. That the Conservatives are saying UKIP are right but don't vote for them, but you can't out UKIP Nigel Farage, and that the UK needs a lot more immigration to deal with the pensions crisis in the next few decades. We need to make that case now. We've had a few other points that links in with what you've just said, Dylan, which is to do with actually we shouldn't be. James, for example, and Cami have both talked about how the problem here is the problem with immigrations can be solved if it's to do with difficulties to do with public services dealing with it, and the problem with that should be laid at the feet of incompetent politicians, not immigrants or local communities who have had high levels of immigration. Anyone else at this point want to say something?
I'm happy to make a couple of quick points.
Please do.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, and this is a much rehearsed point, but I think it is worth stating again, that in terms of our public services, and especially the NHS, you know, they would not function without people who have come into this country and who work in these services. And so when I hear some of the rhetoric from UKIP, but from others as well, who seem to suggest that we can pull up the drawbridge and that we can just be little Great Britain, I think that is verging on, maybe not even just verging on, I think that is very dangerous talk indeed. Our public services, and especially the NHS, would not work without migrants and without immigration. So that's the first point. The second one is that follows on from that, and it's something I was saying a little bit earlier on. We mustn't demonise the other. We mustn't demonise people who we feel that we can have a go at them because they don't really matter and it makes us feel better about our situation. We really must stop ourselves from doing that and from allowing our public discourse to go that way. And as Dylan has said, it has been going that way. UKIP have been doing it for years. It's just now they're getting the attention, more attention for doing so. Now they have won the European elections and now have a couple of members of Parliament. And my final point is that I live in Leicestershire. My nearest city is obviously Leicester. And Leicester remains for me an absolute model of how different cultures and people from different backgrounds can live and work relatively happily together. And I think if it can happen in Leicester, it can happen elsewhere as well.
Thank you. Again, a few more comments I'd like to read out because people have been putting quite a lot of thought into these. John Mousley, who was on last week, is saying, who has immigration actually been a net benefit for? And he's talking about the figures that are there because he says quite a lot of people have been left behind as a result of this. And he thinks that the idea that we should discriminate against those from outside Europe is worse than anything UKIP has said on the topic. Christie is suggesting that whether Blair was right or wrong on immigration, he wasn't honest. John, let me just find this is a UKIP point that's worth making because a lot has been said about them and there isn't a UKIP supporter here. As a UKIP member, I embrace immigration. I reject the idea that allowing European migration before other types because that's silly. Tom Hewitt at Tom Hewitt is saying people need to remember immigrants also grow old, so it's not necessarily a long-term solution to holes in our public services. Liam Bones at Liam Bones says that Dylan made the first sensible suggestions so far. On the other hand, Dylan Robin is telling us, this is at Miss Robin Alice, Dylan mentioned Blair, burn him, straight and tie. This has created quite a lot of debate, and if people have a look on the hashtag or have a look at our replies at Spectrum Debates, you will see quite a lot going on there. And thank you all very much indeed for that. I'm going to ask people for some final comments, some final brief comments before I ask Lily to close, because we've been on this one for almost half an hour, the best part of, which is quite a long time for this one topic. So final comments from people, please, before I ask Lily to close.
Yeah, I'll take some final comments.
Dylan, go.
Yeah, I think that the most important point was made by Matthew. I completely missed it out. But I think that scapegoating is the most dangerous thing we can do on this topic. I've seen a lot of people who look at immigrants as the root of all evil, that every single problem in the UK is traced back to immigration. And I don't want to be party political, but I do find most of those people coming from the right, coming from UKIP and the right of the Conservative Party. I'm not trying to exonerate my own party. I do believe there are some people in my own party who do have some very worrying views on immigration. And Douglas Carswell was one, Mark Reckless was another, and for all intents and purposes, I'm glad they are gone from my party. They've joined the right party for them, I think. But I think that scapegoating is the most terrifying thing, and we've seen it happening increasingly over the last few years. And it's terrifying because I thought we were past this. I thought we were past the age of choosing a certain group of people and making them the bad people. I think that we should look at people individually. We shouldn't look at anyone as a group. I mean, I'm part of the LGBT community, and I understand that we're definitely a community that gets tarred as a group very, very often. But I like looking at people individually. And I've met a lot of people who have come from different countries at various stages of their life, in various stages over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And I like some, and I hate some, but that's not because they're immigrants.
Thank you very much indeed. Martin, some brief comments from you?
As I understand it, the objection that many people have to immigration is actually uncontrolled immigration. They feel as though nothing is being done to stop such abuses as exist in the system, if any even do exist. I think that the lack of housing in some parts of the country creates a significant problem, not just for people who are interested in thinking about leaving the country because they can't afford a house, and having more people coming into the country, whether they are returning British citizens or people from elsewhere in the world, is just problematic. Immigration is not evenly distributed across the country. People coming to the country tend to concentrate in small areas, and unless we're going to be like Singapore and deliberately split up people, we've got to accept that the market will put and concentrate people in some areas and affect what it's like to live in those areas just because of sheer weight of numbers, without any reference to the colour of skin or cultural background of the people involved. I think we should really concentrate on the distributional effects. What is it doing to the poorest people in our society, if it's doing anything at all? I think it is. I think it causes some people who would otherwise have had jobs to not have jobs. But I think the jury is still out on the effect on wages of people when you include people who are unemployed as a result. And someone mentioned the sort of distinction between European and non-European immigration from the European Economic Area, which commits us to admitting all EEA citizens. I referenced the White Australia policy, disgraceful policy that Australia had until the 70s. It was effectively an arrangement whereby we drew a massive invisible line around an entire continent and said, if you come across that line, we're going to tax or imprison you. Tax in the sense of goods coming over, imprison in the sense of non-white people coming in. The racially discriminatory aspect of that has been removed, but Britain's immigration policy starts to look a bit like that. We discriminate effect in favour of European people from the European Economic Area, and in many other areas of life, if we did something which discriminated in favour of countries full of white people and hurt people from Bangladesh and India who want to come here, that would be called racist. I don't call that racist, but I think that there is certainly a question to answer about why it is that we have this anomaly. But most people don't care about that. They care just about distributional effects and effects on housing in their real lives.
Lovely. Thank you. Matthew, a specific point to you here before your final comments on immigration. And this is John. John Mousey saying an absolute model, absolute good. Why don't you come to the north of Leicester, Matthew, and tell Colville how beneficial it's been to them?
Well, I mean, I don't live in Colville, so unless I knew the facts about that area, it's difficult for me to answer that, and to be ambushed on that is a bit difficult. But on my final points, I say again that it is a net benefit, because that is a plain fact. Issues, Martin raises issues such as housing. Immigrants and immigration are not responsible for our problems on issues such as housing. Our politicians and their lack of leadership are responsible for our problems on those things. And my final point is the reason that I'm glad that my party has not, by and large, played this game of attacking immigrants is because I think that it says something about our values as a country that we welcome in people to this country. And yes, of course, we want people who are able to add to our economy and add to our society. But immigration is a good thing. It's one of the things that makes Britain great.
Thank you very much indeed. Lily, your closing comments on this one, please.
Yeah, I think Matthew and Dylan got absolutely right. I mean, Matthew, you mentioned that we must not demonize the other, and I completely agree with you. And Dylan, you mentioned that scapegoating is the most dangerous thing to do. And I agree with that completely. And I think the fear that the Tories and UKIP and even the Labour Party have done is they've scaremongered on the fear of immigration, and they've been more so UKIP, they've said, okay, if we're going to leave the European Union, all our problems will be solved. If we can reduce immigration, all our problems will be solved. You know, we need to be clear about this. Immigration, on the whole, economically, for our society, is a net benefit. It's good. It's a good thing. And, for instance, Martin, you mentioned about the poor and the effects of immigration on the poor. What you also need to remember, and I think many people don't remember, is immigrants can take jobs here, for example, in the NHS, but they also create jobs. You know, they're entrepreneurs. They have wealth. They can create lots of jobs. So
An immigrant myself,
there's cost of benefits in terms of immigration, and yes, you can point out the cost in terms of housing and in jobs, even though but there's also a lot of benefits included in that. For example, on housing, immigrants aren't the problem with that. It's the politicians. There's not enough house building in our country.
I never blame
And for instance, you also need to remember that there's 2 million Brits in Europe. So there's, I mean, in terms of housing, you know, other countries have to provide housing for British immigrants in Europe. So we need to be clear that immigration is a net benefit for our economy, and we need to stop this scaremongering on immigration that has been promulgated by the UKIP in particular, the Conservative Party and Labour Party. So.
Yeah, my whole point has been, whether it's a net benefit or not, that benefit falls unevenly and may be offset by, not completely, by costs borne by other people in society who aren't here.
Lovely. Thank you all very much indeed for your very thoughtful comments that you've made on all sides of this discussion. We will come back to this again, I'm sure, in future. This does mean that our next couple of topics are going to have to be a little bit shorter, a little bit sharper. I might have to put a timer on you all, but it's time for our random selection. I was going to rant on about how I came across a particular group online last night who were banging on about asylum seekers and refugees, as though that was the big problem with immigration. I spent a long time debating that with them and telling them how wrong they were, but they didn't seem to get it.
I'm sure you did, Gareth. I'm sure you did.
Please do go and have a look at Gareth J. Anderson. Here we go. The high-tech selection for our next topic. The piece of paper that I haven't dropped is Dylan. We're going to your topic now. Off you go.
Okie dokie. So earlier this week, or maybe the end of last week, Julien Blanc, who is a pickup artist in inverted commas, was denied a visa in the UK. And cue a massive outrage from a lot of people saying that we shouldn't be stopping people working in this country due to what they do. A lot of people even saying that he wasn't anti-woman, which actually I think he's possibly the most anti-woman person I've ever seen. And there are quite a few videos online. If you've got the stomach for it, do feel free to Google him. He teaches classes how men pick up women. And even though I don't really go on nights out trying to pick up women, I think that I wouldn't need classes on it. I think people that do need classes on picking up women, I'm not going to comment on them, but they're not my favourite people anyway. But I think that people that teach those classes, and there are quite a few books on it. My sister and I were talking about this earlier, the book called The Game, and it's all about things like that, and things like negging. But he took it one step further. You know, he saw this kind of pickup artist thing, and he said, you know, let's go one step further. Let's bring violence into it. And there are videos of him online, and there are screenshots, and there are things that he said, and he is essentially saying the best way to get to a woman, and there's videos of him choking women with his fingers to his lips, kind of like this, and it's just, I think personally that's kind of terrifying. And I think that even though I don't think the government's in any place to stop anyone working wherever they want, unless there's going to be some incitement to violence or incitement to hatred. And I really do think that this kind of misogynistic attack on society is something we really need to avoid. Looking at the things that he's done and looking at the things that he's said, I don't want him anywhere near this country, anywhere near me or my family. A lot of my female friends go on nights out, and I cannot imagine the fact they'd fall victim to people that have gone to one of his classes or have read one of his books or have seen one of his videos, and they get choked in a club because this guy wants to take her home. The guy said that saying no isn't the end. I think personally saying no is the absolute end. Saying no is the complete end to any sort of flirting or promiscuity that's going towards someone. And I understand you're trying to keep this short, Gareth, so I will let someone else speak on it. But personally, I do believe that we should have denied him a visa. I signed the petition. decision. I hope that a lot of other people did as well. A lot of people did as well. A lot of my friends did as well. I did share it on every platform of social media. I've got about 1 million, so I do hope that everyone did sign it too. And I'm really glad of the outcome.
Thank you very much, Dylan. First comment on this is a question I want others to try and respond to when they come in with their brief responses to this. And this is from Matt Valencourt at MV Libertas. It's a terrible idea to exclude him from the UK. It'll only make him stronger because he will now play on the banned in the UK card. At what point is it right to ban freedom of expression because we just don't like what he says? Who'd like to go first?
Gareth, can I come in there?
Please do.
Thank you. I'll be honest, when I first heard about this dreadful man and the decision to bar him from coming into the country, before I really knew all that much about him the other day, my initial response was, and I hope it was a good liberal initial response, was, well, this is disgraceful. You know, what are we doing banning someone from entering the country? And you know, my normal belief is that if someone idiotic like him wants to come in, well, let's let him in and let's debate him and prove him wrong in debate. I changed my mind after speaking to a female colleague of mine in the Liberal Democrats who made the point to me, as Dylan has just said a little bit about how this man, from what I gather, Gareth, advocates violence against women. And for me, that is the point where actually, and people can say that, you know, the point that I'm about to make is where I go from being liberal to illiberal. I don't really care. For me, him advocating violence against women makes this man not someone I want on our shores. And for me, you know, there is never any excuse. Violence against anybody, and obviously women are part of that anybody that there's no excuse for violence for. And so I'm afraid I do think that the right decision was made, and people can call it illiberal as much as they want. Sometimes even Liberal Democrats advocate illiberal things for the best of reasons, and this is one of those occasions.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Lily in just a moment. Just a couple of comments on this. People are trying to explore the issue quite well here, I think. John Mousey's made the point, and he's then extended it. He is a terrifying person, but can we prove anyone who's taken his classes has become violent or has been prosecuted as a result? And actually, he does sound utterly sick, says John, but we're not. Shouldn't we be worrying about creep in this power for the Home Secretary to ban random people? To further that point, Chris G is making this point that in the 70s, Dylan's position might have stopped high-profile gay activists from coming into the UK and promoting their cause. If someone breaks the laws whilst they're here, they can be arrested. And on the opposite side to that, we've got Robin, Miss Robin Alice. I saw Dylan's link to the pickup artist, and it repulsed me. There is violence in the artist's approach. It's terrifying. And James, at Gaylorsight, can we define the country as a platform? If so, such a response is fine. The guys are disgusting, unbroadcastable. Lily, your views on that and those comments?
No, I agree completely with Matthew and Dylan. I think it's right for the Home Secretary to reject Julien Blanc from coming here. I think any threats in terms of violence, rape threats, you know, abhorrent things that Julien Blanc has essentially advocated, I think is, you know, shouldn't be allowed to come here. I mean, you're not allowed to essentially make rape threats or murder threats. You know, there is a limit in terms of freedom of speech. You can't say everything you want to say in terms of threats, in terms of terrorism. So there is a limit in terms of freedom of speech, and I think what's more important is the influence he's had on men in terms of advocating sexual violence and essentially rape against other women. So no, I think it's absolutely right that he's been rejected from here, and I think what he's advocated is absolutely disgusting, and I think, you know, the Home Secretary was absolutely right.
Thank you. Martin.
I would love to come in on this. Firstly, I think I'd just like to deal with the power that the Secretary of State seems to have to exclude people from the country. We've spent quite a long time talking about allowing people who are not citizens to come into the country, and now we're saying that, that the Secretary of State ought to be able to ban people from entering, and that ban can be exercised in response to popular pressure. Now, there is a chap called Vorna Gabor, or Gabor Vorna, depending on which way you treat his Hungarian name, who's leader of a terrible organisation called Jobbik, which has seats in the Hungarian parliament. It's effectively a fascist organisation. They have uniforms, which would mean they were banned in Great Britain. And he was allowed to come into this country and give a lecture and a rally in London, and advocates a lot worse than sexual violence against women. And is attempting to pass discriminatory laws against Jews and Roma in his home country and drum up support for that here. He was allowed into the country, but we didn't allow Geert Wilders. So this type of power is being used in an arbitrary fashion. I do not believe that the power should repose with the Secretary of State. I think it should be done on a judicial basis, as that will mean that we won't have a situation where an anti-immigrant party can whip up a case-by-case argument against every single person coming into the country. As to this person's views, Julien Blanc, there's a professional pickup artist lecturing to professional virgins, as far as I can work out. I didn't support the ban on extreme pornography because, in the words of Clarence Wilcock, I'm a liberal and I'm against that kind of thing. I don't think that it's possible for a judge, a jury, or a politician to say where legitimate sadomasochistic imagery stops and something completely extreme starts. I thought that law went way too far in what it caught. And this guy is talking about, and you can't tell how serious it is, but it sounds like some people will take it seriously, whether or not that's relevant. Talking about using somewhat unconsensual physical touching, which is advocating criminal offence if that's what he's doing. I don't think that people who are promoting that kind of thing should be banned from the country. I think they should be allowed to come into the country, commit the offence, and get arrested for it and go to jail, not be banned from the country. Let's not preemptively try to decide who comes into the country on the basis of what they might say and do, or we'll start seeing that people from moderate or extreme Muslim backgrounds or other religious backgrounds with different views from us about gender roles will start getting banned as well. And I say that as someone who spent most of this year living in a Muslim country.
Thank you very much, Martin. What you've just said reflects about half of the comments that we're getting at the moment.
Exactly half.
Yes. So, for example, Chris is asking here: would the panel ban an evangelical Christian who is preaching that homosexuals will burn in hell? Further saying that this panel of liberals has just voted to exclude someone from Britain because they don't.
I haven't. I'm a liberal. I'm against that sort of thing.
God damn liberals.
That was tweeted before you spoke.
The really important point of this is that the power is arbitrarily exercisable, and that means that the politician can discriminate on, and always, we may say, oh, we're only banning these sort of people, but actually there may be a secret rule the Secretary of State is following and no ability to work out what the real rule is. So the Secretary of State can discriminate, and we don't have much power to enforce consistency there.
Okay, as someone who is studying law from Dylan's point of view and from mine, someone who hasn't and been called to the bar, it's an interesting question about who should have the power and what judicial oversight there is and whether politicians have the right to ban people. Just a few more comments that people have made, and then I'll open it up for another brief discussion before we go on here. Ryan, and I'm going to get your surname wrong, I'm afraid, Ryan Lightwin. At Ryan Lightwin, protecting freedom of speech is hugely important in a liberal society, but this was about advocating violence. Alicia saying we have people who were imprisoned for actually raping women. Should we then send them all elsewhere, perhaps to a desert island? John Mousley is saying on the particular issue about Jobbik that was raised, their uniforms are based on the World War II Hungarian fascist militia. It's an unbelievable group.
I don't care who's. I mean, it's illegal to be a uniform political organisation in Great Britain. They can go screw themselves,
That's nice and clear.
But the point is that Jobbik and Wilders, one was allowed in, one wasn't, and I think Jobbik is more extreme than Wilders. We've got Wilders and Blanc banned, and we have Jobbik, who's much more extreme than either of these people, allowed in the country to hold a bloody rally.
Yeah, it still does seem like something of a glaring gap there.
Inconsistent.
And Chris G is agreeing with you. He's saying, quite right, Martin, a populist Home Secretary can guarantee herself front pages by banning dumb celebrities. But Robin says there's a difference between allowing a creep into the country and allowing a man who's planning forcing women into it. And here we are. Robin is then replying to the point made by Chris, you awful liberals, not letting the sexual assault class instructor into Britain. God, it's like you hate people. I think there's a wonderful dose of sarcasm in there. James is saying, can we define... No, he said that before. Who is to say that he wouldn't sexually assault British women? And Cami saying, if we can't ban someone who advocates intimidation and physical violence like him, how can we justify deporting anti-liberty Islamic hate preachers? Some complex points there. I'll go in reverse order now, if I may, to finish off the topic. So I'll come to Lily, Matthew, and then Dylan to close.
Right. Oh, me first?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. No, I think in terms of freedom of speech, there is a limit. I mean, the point about Wilders and Jobbik, I mean, that's a separate issue. You can argue, well, that was the wrong decision to do, rather than saying Blanc decision was wrong. But I don't know. I don't think you should allow people to advocate violence and rape against other people. I think you should do that for any person, rather than an exception. So I think that should be throughout the whole case, in my opinion.
This guy was not advocating rape, as far as I understand it.
Well, he's been influencing people who
been
commit sexual
arguable.
violence.
Yeah, Matthew, your final comments on this, please.
Oh, yes, thanks, Gareth. Yeah, I mean, just a few quick points. First of all, on the Home Secretary's powers, don't get me wrong, as a Liberal, I certainly do think that this law could be, this ability to arbitrarily ban people could, of course, be misused. But I do happen to think that on this occasion, it is the right thing to do. So that's the first point. My second one is that I think this gentleman and what he does demeans men. I think absolutely demeans men, and most good, decent men in this country who would never, ever think of behaving in the type of way that he advocates. And part of that, did you see this week following when all this blew up in the news? Did you hear the comments of the BBC Radio, I think, Norfolk presenter Nick Conrad, who made the news in his talk show, suggesting that women should, and I quote, keep their knickers on, and intimated that men can't control themselves. Well, this is a BBC radio presenter on a daytime talk show, and that's if that's the kind of comments that even discussion of whether this man can come into the country is generating, then I think it's all the more important and the right thing that the Home Secretary has said, you will not enter our shores.
Thank you. Dylan, to close the topic, please.
Hello. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to go right back to the beginning first. One of the first comments you received on the entire issue, which was Chris G, saying that using my logic, we would not let in pro-gay activists in the 80s. If I ever get to the time in my life where the pro-LGBT movement is comparable to violence against women, then I think it's time for me to leave this planet, quite frankly. No offense to Chris, but I think that's a completely ridiculous point. In terms of summing the whole thing up, I think that it's a really important issue to look at in terms of arbitrary Home Secretary powers. I think that it was a really important point that was raised because we should look at things independently in terms of things like this, especially when there's been a massive public outcry. If there's not such a huge public outcry, a huge petition online, a lot of people supporting it on social media, a lot of people supporting it that I've spoken to about it, I think this time more than any we should look at genuine independence. So as Gareth said earlier, I think it's quite interesting in terms of who should decide, the executive, the judiciary. I think personally it should be a judicial issue, but at the moment it's not. It is an issue down to the Home Secretary, and she decided this, which I think is fantastic. Looking at the Geert Wilders and the organisation, which name I've forgotten, I'm sorry about that.
Jobbik.
That's the one, yes. I think, again, we should look at what Jobbik is saying, and I again think it should be an independent decision. We should look at the fact that Jobbik should not be coming into this country. Geert Wilders was rightly denied to come into this country, and I think that Julien Blanc, again, was rightly denied to come into this country as well.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you all for your comments at home. Again, really great debate that's been taking place on there. Our viewers engaging with each other as well. I do love to see that. Now we have two final topics. Now, all of you, I'm limiting your comments now because we're going to be greatly overrunning. We're only halfway through our comments. We're not going to be going on for 2 hours here. Okay, so I might be cutting you off individually or as a whole. Our final two, using our high-tech method. The penultimate topic is going to be Matthew's. Go.
Hi there, thanks very much, Gareth. Well, briefly then, in the time that we have remaining, I wanted to talk about the rise of the SNP, the Scottish National Party, and quite an apposite week to do that when they had their new leader, Nicola Sturgeon, confirmed as First Minister. And I just think it's a really interesting thing that despite the fact that they lost the independence referendum, which I think many people thought that would kind of see the SNP fall in on themselves and have a lot of acrimony. Actually, we've not seen that at all. And the campaign appears to have inspired people, reinvigorated politics in Scotland, tens of thousands of new members. I think I heard Nicola Sturgeon saying that now 1 in 50 adults in Scotland is a member of the SNP. Incredible. And I think the rest of the parties have something to learn from that. And very quickly, I think those things are simple, popular, although hopefully not populist messaging. For the SNP, an allegedly anti-establishment rhetoric, a bit like UKIP, although of course in Scotland they are the establishment now. But I think the most important thing for me, and this is something I say within the Liberal Democrats the whole time, is that in terms of us as a party, we will only reconnect with people, and certainly reconnect with the centre-left voters which used to flock to us, when we remember our values, yes, of individual liberty, but also of a concern for the community. And I think that the SNP, and I don't know the ins and outs of their individual policies because I'm not in Scotland, but they appear to be a values-driven party, and that has obviously proven very popular.
Thank you, Matthew. Just 2 points I'd like to make briefly before I open it up to further brief comments from everybody, is that it was amazing to see, quite frankly, the enormous rally that they held the other day, yesterday, the day before, in that auditorium in Glasgow. Over 12,000 people, completely rammed. Just astonishing. The last time there was a political party that had such a large amount of membership in the UK, it was the Conservative Party in the 1950s. So there we are. I'll just leave that one there with you. So our brief comments, please. If you can try and keep it to 90 seconds. Who'd like to go?
Yeah, I'll take it if you like.
Off you go.
I think that it's the reason their membership has spiked and the reason their support has spiked and absolutely destroyed Labour in Scotland, which of course I'm delighted about. It's not because they lost the by-election, but in spite of the fact the referendum, sorry, but in spite of the fact they lost the referendum, the base, they're not going to be dissuaded so easily. It's so hard not to draw comparisons with Catalonia and Spain. Looking at Catalonia's fight for independence, it's been slapped down so many times by the Spanish government and said it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen. And the fight just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I really think that the SNP are going to grow in number, grow in size. They're really going to grow in power as well. They're not looking like they're going to lose any power in the Scottish Parliament anytime soon. They're going to get more seats next year in the Westminster Parliament than any time in history, and this is a real big time for Scotland. And I think that the referendum was actually, even though the Westminster parties thought it would be the end of the campaign, I think it was really just the beginning, and the massive growth in membership has really shown that.
Thank you very much, Dylan, and well within time. Well done. A couple of comments here before I come to anybody else. We've had John Mousey's telling us it's a rise when they have over 45% of the population as members. This is just 45% of the population of Scotland not liking a result. Adam Hawkes, he's praising us. Thank you, Adam. We'll come back to that not later. Matt Green at MattJackGreen98. The SNP is winning in Scotland because the Scottish people do not like the North London Labour elite. That was your timer, by the way. Dylan. So well done.
Well within time.
Very, very good. A confused ninja at a confused ninja. For the first time in many varied elections, the people of Scotland felt their votes actually meant something. Slightly controversial one here, perhaps, from Cameron S. at Cameron_surname. The Nuremberg rallies were quite impressive too. Not the only similarity between them. # National Socialists. Cami Singh here at Cameron Singh CL. The SNP is now truly a mass party. If its success was replicated across the UK, it would have 1 million members, which should be scary for unionists. And we've got Ryan here, who is in Scotland. He says the key to SNP success here in Scotland has been talk left, act right. The SNP strongholds are in ex-Tory areas like Perthshire. And Stephen Donnelly at Stephen Donnelly 95. The SNP have become what many people in working class areas of Scotland, such as Clydebank, hoped Labour would be. Well, I think that might be a good point, Lily, actually, to come to you.
Yeah. Well, first thing first, a confused ninja. You have the best username on Twitter. I love your username. Secondly, I think the rise of the SNP has come on two particular reasons. One, because the Scottish Labour Party are a bit useless. They don't really have that many left-wing policies because they're tied to the rest of the United Kingdom Labour Party. For example, they don't want to get rid of Trident. They're not really left-wing on economics. So to start off, they haven't. The Scottish Labour Party are a bit useless, and their leadership haven't been very inspiring. So, for instance, the Labour MSPs in Holyrood, they're not really world-class people. The majority of Scottish Labour Party politicians are in Westminster. You know, they're fighting the Tories. They think the Tories are more of a danger, whereas there's not many world-class politicians fighting the SNP in Scotland. So that's the first reason. Second reason I would say the rise of the SNP is they're very UKIP-like. They're very nationalist. They're very populist. They've got an inspirational, charismatic, articulate leader who's going to take down that foreign enemy, you know, with UKIP being Brussels, the SNP being Westminster. So there's many good comparisons you can make with UKIP and the SNP. I mean, you know, that's why the SNP has got very populist messages, and if there's any criticisms of the SNP, they'll just blame Westminster. So there you go.
Oh, 2 seconds to spare. Well done, Lily. Thank you very much indeed. Martin.
Okay, the first thing I'd like to say about the SNP is that they make physical force of republicanism in Ireland look like the blood-drenched bunch of murderers that it is. You know, Alex Salmond managed to come close to withdrawing from the United Kingdom without a punch being thrown, let alone a bullet being fired. And that is a great testament to how politics is conducted in Great Britain, and I think that the SNP should be commended for keeping it decent. I was horrified by the rhetoric of their supporters. If you saw Eddie Redder on Question Time or have debated with some of these people, it is just terrifying to be shouted down and ignored in your arguments. And the sheer stridency with which these views are put across, and the way in which opposing views, unionist views, are shouted down is frightening. But it is absolutely non-violent and all constitutionalist, and so there's an interesting tension there. It sort of exposed the fact that the political class in Westminster doesn't really believe in the union. And we are now in a fight about Westminster's place within the Union rather than a fight over whether the union between Scotland and the rest of the UK should survive. I think the SNP is to be congratulated, I guess, for getting 5% of the vote on Scottish independence without even knowing what currency they'll be using in 2 years' time. And yeah, I oppose them, but well done to them.
We're all doing really well here. This is great. No one's been caught out by the timer. Thank you very much for that. A few more comments from people, and then we'll see where we go. Again, this is producing some really interesting stuff on here. John Mousey is telling us that Scottish Labour is the remnants of those not good enough to make it to Westminster. Labour need to send people back. Pyro's Cazador Army at Pyroanus we've got some competition here, I think, for the best Twitter
Got
name.
good
I predict the SNP will have at least 30 seats in the 2015 general election, killing any chance of a Labour majority. Big smile. Chris G, the SNP makes cuts. That's Westminster cutting the grant. The SNP increases investment. Superb fiscal management. There's a comment there on their ability to actually do politics. And a few more here. We've got Liam Bones is telling us that Liam Bones, the SNP revitalised the political scene in Scotland. They're now reaping the rewards. Matt Green is saying UKIP are actually also representing the London elite. Nigel Farage was a city trader. Cami Singh, the IndyRef campaign invigorated Scots democracy. Registration is at 98%, and polling suggests turnout will be much higher than in England. So there's a lot to take in there, and I have to say, I think whatever your view of their policies and their ideas, it's impossible to suggest that Alex Salmond is anything other than a remarkable politician who has come back again and again, and each time he's brought the SNP forward. I mean, he took independents from well below 30% to support to 45% in the course of that campaign, and despite losing, the SNP seems to be triumphant. It's a remarkable situation for any politician to get themselves into, and he and Nicola Sturgeon have done a remarkable thing for their cause, as far as I'm concerned. Views or comments briefly before I ask Matthew to close this debate?
No.
I thought Lily's point about their structural role within the Scottish political system was well made. I think they used to play the role that the Tories played, and if you look in sort of sectarian terms, that they took over the Protestant position within Scotland, in effect. But yeah, they are somewhat like the Tories and somewhat like UKIP as being the sort of anti-Labour party. And I think when there is a national question of who governs, are we part of a larger union, it's harder to do left-right politics. You end up with left-left politics or right-right politics instead.
Thank you. Dylan?
Hello.
Anything you'd like to say before I end the topic?
Yeah, actually, very briefly, it's not necessarily completely related, but what I think is fantastic is that the SNP chose Nicola Sturgeon as their leader, and now she's the first female First Minister in Scotland ever, if I'm not incorrect. I think that's completely right. I'd rather it be Ruth Davidson, of course, because not only is she a woman, she's also LGBT, and more importantly, she is a Conservative, but I still think that it's a fantastic step to get Nicola Sturgeon as the first ever female First Minister. A really good step for female equality.
Having a Conservative First Minister would be sheer tokenism.
Well, we'll see. I mean, bear in mind, the only party before now ever to get over 50% of the vote in Scotland was the Conservative Party, again back in the 1950s. But it was quite remarkable the other day to watch a female presiding officer take nominations for 2 female candidates for First Minister in the Scottish Parliament. And that's something that Westminster does need to catch up on, because it's not had serious challenges from sort of female candidates really since Margaret Beckett's challenge for the Labour leadership, and before that it was Margaret Thatcher. So there have been more people called Margaret in Westminster than women in general going for it, which seems something of a shame. Lily, your final point, and then Matthew's going to close this debate.
Final point. No, I would just reiterate what I just said. I mean, the SNP are going to win quite a lot of seats next year. It just depends whether the Labour Party can get their act in gear. You know, as long as the Labour Party can actually have devolution for the actual party and have left-wing policies, the SNP aren't going to have much of a challenge. Even though the Conservatives seem to be getting a bit stronger and finding their place in Scotland a lot more under the impressive leadership of Ruth Davis. So I think the Labour Party need to get their act in gear. The SNP aren't as strong as I think people think. There's a lot of weaknesses. They're very populist. If we can force them into a position where they just they have to keep blaming Westminster, and if they won't deny having a referendum in the next 10 years, I think the SNP could eventually get defeated. But as long as the parties in Scotland, get their act in gear to face the SNP, because they're not as strong as people think.
Thank you. Finally, then, go on, Matthew. Time to close this debate, please.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Yeah, I mean, I think your comments were absolutely right. I mean, I think it's arguable that the SNP are the most successful political party at the moment in these islands. I think they have a majority government. They are winning tens of thousands of new members. What other party in government or otherwise is doing that? Just a couple of more quick points. I think it's right that Labour in Scotland are not Labour anymore. I watched the debate the other day when Nicola Sturgeon became First Minister in the Parliament, and I thought the two most impressive speakers were herself, who seems very competent, and Ruth Davidson. And although I disagree with Ruth Davidson on her Conservative politics, she appears very competent and very able. And I thought the Labour person who spoke was a bit humdrum, really. A couple of more quick points. I think Labour will not beat the SNP from the right. I think the idea that Jim Murphy's going to come in and save the day for Labour is rubbish. I personally hope that it'll be Neil Findlay who will genuinely test the SNP over whether they are a social democratic party. And I think it says a lot also about London Labour, in that Ed Miliband fails to connect in the north of England and he fails to connect in Scotland. I know we're not discussing him as a subject tonight, but I think he is trouble for the Labour Party.
Thank you very much, Matthew. A couple of points before we go to our final topic. Tom Hewitt is telling us that the SNP succeeds because they can take credit for all the good things in Scotland and blame all the bad on Westminster. We've had Matt Vaillancourt is pointing out that they're playing the same anti-Westminster card. The SNP is very similar to other nationalist parties elsewhere, such as the ERC, the PQ in Canada, and the NVA in Belgium. Robin, Alex Salmond is a remarkable politician, just an idea. And John Mousley is agreeing with the things that you said, Lily, about the SNP being a glass tiger. Cami Singh, I think the time is now for the Scots Tories to take back some of their former heartlands by showing how being left with Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister will fail to represent the Highland and rural communities, and who will fixate on the Strathclyde and Central Belt region. Poor Alicia, we haven't unfortunately caused. Oh no, Ryan, I'll come to that one. I know Ryan is saying us that part of the reason UKIP doesn't do well in Scotland is because we already have populist nationalists in the SNP, and a confused ninja is back. Even in the event of the yes vote, Westminster would have been a convenient voting man for at least a generation.
I agree with him completely.
I apologise to Alicia at Upon a Cloud because she put her veggies into roast during our debate, but she's managed to do it without the oven being on. So I think we should take some responsibility for that, for which we are very sorry. Before we move on to our final topic, which will be introduced by Martin, who's going to have 2 minutes to introduce, and everyone else will have a minute to speak. Because we're now way over. Just say I've met Ruth Davison a couple of times, and she is one of, forgetting politicians, she's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. She was just lovely. But anyway, there we are. Our final topic, as I said, is going to be introduced by Martin.
Okay, thank you. This is a bit left field, possibly, but I, for more than 10 years now, have been very concerned about the role that international treaties play in the bread and butter of our lawmaking, particularly in relation to copyright and patents and other intellectual property rights, but more broadly. Treaties have a very good reputation. We've had many great international organizations have been set up as treaty-based organizations, and they've been used for banning various war crimes and similar abuses. But in general, most of the treaties to which this country is subject, of which there are more than 10,000, deal with incredibly humdrum matters of product market regulation and labour market regulation and so on, saying, not exactly the bent bananas and cucumbers of Brussels directives, but similar sorts of things. How long should copyright be, and what should the penalties be for breaching a patent? And recently you've seen in the news a treaty called TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the US and the European Union. And you'll have seen criticisms of this on the grounds that it was negotiated in secret and damages various important interests of working people, and there are all sorts of different criticisms about it. But the constitutional point is now being made that the fact that it's a treaty and therefore has to be negotiated in secret is deeply problematic. it used to be the case that people who criticised treaties on that basis were criticised as not being internationalist enough, and people have said, well, regulation helps protect labour rights, and therefore all of it must be good, which clearly isn't what they mean to say. But whenever one tries to say, you know, the very fact that we're being governed by laws that are derived ultimately from treaties is deeply problematic. People who say that are often criticised for saying, well, you want to get rid of all labour market regulation. I'm going to cede the floor now, but basically I think that we need much better parliamentary scrutiny of the operation of treaties, as effectively the scrutiny at the moment is completely non-existent.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. It's quite a skill to sum up a very complicated topic in such a short space of time, but thank you, because that I understood, which was good. Before I go on to anyone else, one of the issues I debated with these people I mentioned before was about international treaties, and this was a group claiming to be a new wing of UKIP, saying they were UKIP Democrats and they wanted Swiss-style direct democracy. And I was quite flabbergasted, because the big thing they thought would be the great example to use a new direct democracy citizens referendum initiative promised for would be to hold a referendum on changing, scrapping or withdrawing from the 1951 Refugee Convention. Of all the things in the world to talk about and think of, I thought that was, personal opinion here, let me Claxon it out now, pretty low, and quite sad that you're taking what is a really interesting and great idea about a direct democracy and choosing to apply it to people who are fleeing persecution, fleeing for their lives, and to suggest that this is the thing that will grab people's attention on it. So I thought that was interesting, but that's just my view on it, and it holds no greater sway than anyone else's. I wonder if anyone else on here would like to comment on this issue in general, either on TTIP or TTIP or treaties and how we deal with them and secrecy and so on.
Yeah, just briefly.
Dylan.
Yeah, perhaps as a testament to TTIP, I only actually heard about it when I was told that it was a topic for this debate. And I think that the secrecy behind it has been incredibly terrifying. I mean, despite what it stands for, whether it stands for economics or immigration or anything, it doesn't matter what it stands for. Things should be open and people should know about what's happening to them. When I dug into it and actually had a look at what was going on and what they were suggesting and what was being proposed, I do think that it is, by and large, a decent thing. I'm not going to pretend I'm a massive scholar. I'm not going to pretend I know millions about it, because I don't. But I do think that looking at the reports I've read on it from various think tanks, both from the left and from the right, I do think that it is doing a world of good. In terms of international treaties as a whole, I think that they have done a lot of good as well. But again, I think we need to be careful not to replicate previous treaties in bringing in new ones, because I've looked at international treaties before, and I think that a lot of international treaties do have a lot of the same things as previous ones, and it really does make for a lot of heavy reading when it comes to studying international law, which is what I'm doing next year. But that's all I've really got to say on it. But yeah, in terms of secrecy, I think that's terrifying and something we should really stop and open up and be more transparent about.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Who'd like to go next? Matthew, something about the issues to do with secrecy and European trade and free trade with America?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I'd really comment on is TTIP. I mean, I'm not a big fan of it. I think it could spell trouble for our NHS, amongst other things, with one of the main aims of TTIP being to open up Europe's public health services to US companies. I would prefer our health service. I personally would prefer our health service to be totally free of any private involvement. And so, I worry about TTIP and what it means for our public services, among other things. Beyond that, I've not really got a lot to say on the matter.
Thank you very much. Well within time. We're doing well, panel. I'll have you all back. Lily.
Yeah. I think on TTIP at the moment, I would be opposed to it, because I think we need to know the full implications involved in the treaty. There needs to be more transparency, and we need to know exactly what the regulations would be for the for the treaty, and in particular the NHS. I mean, what is going to happen to the NHS if we sign this particular treaty? I mean, are we going to have to deal with regulations that comply with US regulations, which is a lot less, which is worse, or is corporations going to be able to sue the government for hurting their profit? I mean, one possible implication if we sign TTIP is that big corporations are able to sue governments if they threaten their profits. For example, if they increase taxes or they nationalize particular businesses, or for instance, the NHS, there isn't really a profit motive involved at all. So in terms of TTIP, I would be opposed to it until we need to know the full implications involved, especially for the NHS. You know, the NHS. Okay, never mind. Damn you, Gareth.
I know. I might let you have another quick go in a second. Just a few comments that have been made on this one so far. John Housy's saying us there, giant international treaties never go wrong. World War I was a complete surprise to all the alliances. # sarcasm. Chris G saying every treaty that's signed affects our sovereignty. He happens to approve of TTIP, however, as it's likely to cut business costs and prices. He also says, do any on the panel think that a treaty is more likely to pass if negotiations are in the open and domestic interest groups can see that they have interests sacrificed for the greater good? There's a very nice comment here, Dylan, asking where you've been in recent weeks, but that's an entirely personal. Liam Bones is telling us, I think TTIP is a great concept which, if successfully managed, can do lots for us, but we must keep the NHS out of the deal. Okay, very brief 10-second comments from anyone before I ask Martin to close our final debate.
Do you want me to answer Chris's point just quickly? He's just said if it's more likely to pass if negotiations open. I think it's going to be less likely to pass, because why would they not be transparent in it if it was a good thing? So I think they've got something to hide. So I would say no, it would be more likely not to pass personally.
Okay. Anyone else? 10-second comments from anyone before
if I could defend my ignorance, I do live in the southwest, and we are about 3 weeks behind with the news and about 3 years behind with everything else. So that's the reason I haven't heard about it yet. I'm sorry about that.
Matthew, anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so, really, on that, to be honest, Gareth.
Fair enough. Right, Martin, you have a minute to close.
Okay, well, we've spoken about secrecy and the effect on the NHS. I think that these things are treaties because it's easier to pass laws as treaties than it is to pass a statute or even to amend the national constitution. And it's certainly harder to resist, to reverse a rule once it is in an international treaty. And so it's both easier to get treaties through, and because there's less scrutiny, and it's harder to change because it requires general unanimity rather than amending a national constitution. As to the NHS, a treaty, since these things are basically undemocratic, they're very, very little discussed, and you only get one chance to vote on them in Parliament rather than 10 or 15 votes as you would with a statute. You're in the situation where once you've conceded the general principle that unelected bureaucrats can write your laws, then those laws can be moved to damage protection for workers' rights as well as to improve it. So you've got to, it's a completely general problem. And if you say, oh, we'll have a carve out for the NHS but concede the general principle, then ultimately you'll end up with the general principle having been conceded that you can be governed from afar via this sort of mechanism, and they will use the overall control they've got to chip away at the exception you got for something like the NHS.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to all of my panelists down here. You've been absolutely superb in introducing your topics, debating them and taking part. Thank all of you at home or wherever you are, tweeting us, sending in your comments and questions and challenges. I'm sorry I didn't get round to all of you. There were so many and they were so good. We're very, very grateful. If you would like to appear here, I promise it's pretty simple. It really is very easy. We would welcome you. All you need is a webcam, a mic, and some opinions. And it can be just, the thing that came with your iPod or your iPhone or your mobile. or anything on the it's really simple to get involved. So please DM us, get in touch. We would like lots of you on here from all sorts of political opinions. Next Sunday is another regular debate show, but I have had requests for 2 single topic debates, one on the European Union. So if you would like to get involved in that one, pro, anti, or you're really not sure but you want to get in touch. The second one is on devolution in England and the constitutional settlements in the UK, because people talk about it being a really complex matter. What should England get now in relation to everything that has happened and has gone on, not only recently, but since the Devolution Acts of the late 1990s? So those are the 2 shows that I've had requests for. If you've got ideas about how we could do them, when we could do them, or if you'd like to be on, let us know. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again very soon. And once I've found the button that ends this broadcast, I will indeed stop it. Thank you, good night, and goodbye.